give it to me straight, Neil. How hard am I going to cry in episode 6?
Well, if you're anything like me, you're going to cry really hard. It's super emotional. The actors left nothing on the table. They put it all out there.
I got to say, it's pretty mean to only give us one episode to watch, man. But the first episode was excellent. What was most important for you to establish right out of the gate?
Oh, there's a lot of things to establish. Any first episode needs to do a lot of heavy lifting. And so it's kind of the hardest episode to write. And in terms of directing, you're kind of prepping not only that episode, but the whole season, because you're setting all sorts of things. What does Jackson look like? What are they wearing? What's the tone? All of these things. So for me, it was just like the perennial screenwriting problem. How do you bring people back in, get them back up to speed, meet new characters, learn all sorts of information, and be entertaining and kind of seamless as you go? Easier said than done. So we worked really hard on that, and hopefully it did feel like a good, compelling hour of TV without, too much exposition crammed in.
Well, the show is actually, it's structured very differently than the game. How do you feel like that affects Ellie's emotional arc, considering, it does sort of swap back and forth compared to the game where it's these large chunks that you spend with the characters?
I think it's really good for the show and giving context to all of the characters. Like, we get to see like Abby's backstory as her character is introduced, and I think that's really important to sort of understand and empathize with that with Abby and her crew, as well as like Ellie and the story going on there. I think that every character in the world of The Last of Us feels well-rounded and complicated and layered. There's no like hero and there's no villain. Like I was saying, everyone is sort of both at the same time, and there's a push and pull there. And so I think that the sort of the different way that the show is structured to the game actually really benefits the narrative.
Abby is one of the most physically imposing characters in gaming. So I wanted to know, was there ever a discussion about how to convey her strength differently in live action?
Really great way to put it, honestly. I think what I believe Abby to be is someone, yes, very, very, very strong, but I think she's very like emotionally strong. And I think that like her strength and rage is something that like energetically like emits off of her. I don't know. It's like it was something that Craig and Neil and I talked about in our very first meeting. They with all of the characters, they want to make this show. Obviously, it's very much inspired by the game, but they want to make it their own and really dive into each character's complexities. And I think that with Abby in particular, their main focus was to get to the core of who she is and what drives her. And I think that was something that was really important to me, because I think that there is a lot to her that you would think is evil person. And that is a very like surface level description of her, I think, truly. And I think that there's what is so powerful about her when she walks into a room is her past and how she, what she's been through, and the loss that she's experienced is so immense that is a lot. I think that's what is her driving force in her arc in the show.
How did you go about deciding when and how to weave Abby's and Ellie's stories together?
Well, we have opportunities that Neil didn't have in the creation of the game, because we're not stuck with one perspective, and we also don't have to worry about gameplay function. But there's a thing that they get that we don't, which is a kind of instant connection to a character when you're playing them. Like, people will say, oh yeah, when I was Joel, or when I was Ellie, or when I was Abby. And in the case of Abby in particular, when we meet her in the game, we are her. So we are now invested in keeping ourselves as Abby alive. In the show, we don't have that. So it was important for me and Neil to figure out how to introduce Abby to an audience that did create a sense of connection, or at least a sense of understanding. As we go forward with her, we have some anchoring, some emotional anchoring with her. But the larger structural issue is a complicated one that we kind of dug into, not only to figure out how we wanted to intertwine those stories, but also how we wanted to tell them across multiple seasons. Because unlike the first game, which we felt we could contain in one season. We knew the story of the second one was too big for a single season.
When you're playing as a character, you empathize with them almost immediately. I don't know why that happens, but it happens time and time again. In game one, we saw it with Sarah. As soon as you played as Sarah, we found players cared for her enormously. In the show, we couldn't just do it one-to-one. We had to really expand on Sarah's story. You have to give it more context. You have to understand more of her relationship. That's how we were able to create this empathic connection, because we don't have the interactive element. Likewise with Abby, you're not playing as Abby. You're not opening the game, surviving as her, fighting infected, having Joel come and like unite with you, all this stuff. You don't get to do it that way. So we had to find another way to create this empathic connection. We have to bring in certain contexts that happen much later in the game to the front of the game. Likewise, there's something else that happens in the game, which is their upgrade trees. You're kind of defining their abilities, Ellie and Abby's abilities, as you're playing the game. We actually experimented with this when we were making the game. If you were to jump back and forth, it's so disruptive to the player, because you have a certain play style based on how you've upgraded the character, and now you got to switch it. Wait, where was I? What did I do? Oh, right, this is a whole other character. Okay, and so we were very we picked and chose those moments very carefully and very deliberately because of gameplay mechanics. We don't have those constraints right now, so we have to rethink, reinterrogate that structure. Now, there's certain structural things that remain the same, but certain that have changed for these reasons.
What do you feel like is the biggest difference between your versions of Dina and Jesse compared to the game's versions of the characters?
Well, I think Stephen Chang did a really great job with his character Jesse. Like in the game, he's such a cool, calm, collected dude that's just there at the right times and very clutch and very reliable. But I think there's somewhat of a departure from that. From what I could glean from the writing is that Jesse is a bit in the live action. He's a bit more. I said Boy Scout, but that's too intense. More like just very stalwart and very, very grounded in like the obligations and responsibility to the community of Jackson. And I don't recall if in the game it was explicitly stated, but in the show, Jesse feels as if Tommy and Maria are kind of looking towards him to be the next successor of kind of overseeing the town. And so there's that added pressure, which kind of dictates Jesse's actions and decisions throughout the show, and which is a great contrast to Ellie, who is going off the rails pretty much. And I think that creates an interesting dynamic because of their relationship.
Tommy plays, such a crucial role in Ellie's journey in part 2. How did you approach his evolution from the first season?
From season 1 to season 2, 5 years have passed. So there is an evolution in his physical evolution, or his physical kind of de-evolution, I suppose, as he's aging. I'm sure there's some joints, some shoulder issues, some knees, some things that are going out but he's still fighting through it, and he has a lot more to fight for, as he and Maria have given birth to a son, Benjamin, who is now 5 years old at this point. I came to work in physically pretty good shape, and Craig was like, "No, man, you're not supposed to be in good shape. You're getting older." I would soon come to find that, with all the requirements of episode 2 and beyond, there's a lot of physical requirements that I was glad I was in the shape I was in. But Tommy he's in a good place, man. The whole family's in a good place. The family is growing. The community is growing. It's certainly putting strain on our infrastructure, and there's a bit of a debate about that and refugees and who should be let in and who can be let in. And so I think, but Tommy is more kind of, Tommy's a simple man.
Yeah.
Simple kind of man, as Leonard Skinner would say.
Isabella, does Dina do anything this season that even comes remotely close to the physical challenge of giving birth to a xenomorph?
Oh, you know what? I did have an experience, and I'm going to say what episode 4. And you'll see it's a very particular scene, and you'll know it was just a lot of cardio, a lot of action, a lot. Very cool, though. Very cool. I have a lot of BTS that I'll be sharing. But yeah, I would say they go through a lot. And luckily for Alien, it wasn't even my body. So it was my top half, but it was not.
That helps.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't have to do any cardio.
On the subject of Alien, I mean, you've already been a part of all these massive universes. I mean, you've got The Last of Us, Alien, Superman, all with huge, passionate fan bases. Has being a part of The Last of Us and Alien helped prepare you for stepping into the DC world and taking on Hawk Girl, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think each approach to a huge IP with a huge fan base has sort of gotten a little bit easier with each experience, which is so cool to say. It's so cool to say. It's really, I think I've felt more comfortable. And I think the secret to doing it well, I think might be to just believe in yourself. Crazy, I know. Crazy concept. It's like just feeling confident as an actor is hard enough as it is. So you kind of just, it is a bit radical to say, but yeah. And then also having a good people around you to support you, because without Ellie, I don't think Dina's half as interesting, I guess. Your dynamic is so important. So without the chemistry that Bella and I have naturally, because we literally just started hanging out when we were filming. So what you see is what you get, and what it was there from the first day.
Do you feel a different kind of pressure from each one? I mean, I know you said it's sort of getting easier, but is there one that stands out to you as like the most intense fan base to please?
Dora. Dora had me in a chokehold. I was so scared. Maybe it's because of my personal, connection to her, but yeah, that one for sure.
One thing I wanted to ask you is, I mean, you've played characters like, we'll use Robbie Reyes as an example of somebody, he's literally defined by vengeance. And Tommy, who becomes consumed by grief and revenge in The Last of Us Part 2. What have these roles taught you about the nature of vengeance, both in storytelling and how it affects a character's soul?
I think that's a beautiful question, Chris. And I think that is the crux and kind of that is the point that we're hoping that people are able to derive from our story. The nature of The Last of Us 2 is a story about the cycle of vengeance, the wheel of vengeance, and how it can be broken. Neil's inspiration for this story is, of course, sourced in a very real conflict that we see going on in the world right now, in the land of his birth. And I think it's just about, where did it start? Everyone has a different starting point for where the conflict started and who started it. But that is not important. What's important is how is there a possibility for a resolution? Is there a possibility for peace and life to prevail? And the story of The Last of Us is a tragic one. It's a terrible tragedy, because people do learn lessons of forgiveness, but at great cost. I think that now that we're on this journey of telling the story of the second season, I hope that people are able to clock these moments and this lesson that is rooted in a conflict that is happening as we speak. Mm-hmm. That the wheel must be broken. The wheel of vengeance and hatred must be broken. You cannot fight and kill your way to peace.
The Last of Us Part 2, the game, sparked some really intense conversations, I feel like, about revenge and loss and empathy. Did you see this adaptation as an opportunity to refine or reframe any of those ideas for a new audience?
No. I love those conversations. I love how intense the conversations have been around Last of Us Part 2, even from the people that, didn't agree with the choices the characters made, or even the choices we've made as creators. The fact that people are still talking about it 5 years later, I think should be telling about the story that we made. So for me, the changes come from the fact that we're adapting it to a different medium, the fact that we're collaborating. Hallie and I are now collaborating with another writer, Craig Mazin, who has his own ideas and choices he would want to bring into it. That's where the changes come from. That's where we get to really work extremely hard to honor what we did with Last of Us Part 2, what Naughty Dog created with Last of Us Part 2, and make sure that what we do in the TV lives up to it, because people have very high expectations for this thing. But as far as it refining or changing, that would make it seem like I have some regrets, and I have none.
Now, were there any controversial elements from, Part 2, the video game, that you felt needed to be handled differently in the adaptation?
Not because they were controversial. Anything that we thought we wanted to handle differently was because we were working in a different medium. We just made those decisions. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think people may look at certain decisions we make and think, oh, this is in response to this criticism or this controversy, and it's not. it's because we wanted to move this piece over here for adaptation reasons, which meant this piece could go here. And we really try as best we can to shut that all out. We think about the audience all the time. We're always thinking about how to craft something beautiful for them. But what we don't think about necessarily is some of the audience feedback, because we know that the actual numerical audience for the show is enormous. And we just don't want to necessarily overprivilege people who happen to be very vocal in one platform or another.
How do you go about protecting yourself emotionally between takes when you're exploring a character who's really going through some very dark times?
Well, between takes, I normally have the complete opposite emotion on purpose to the emotion that I'm experiencing within the take. Like leading up to my coverage, I suppose, of like emotional takes, I'm doing the complete opposite. Like I'm listening to the like most upbeat songs, getting myself energized, just feeling like on top of the world, because then that crash into like the depth and the darkness feels so much heavier and feels like I can go to a deeper place rather than like being exhausted and being in this like deep dark place all day, which is how some people do it, but it's not my way of doing it. I'm almost like the most light and breezy that I ever am on days where I'm doing the darkest things. But once we're in the motion of it, once we've started like filming on my coverage, between takes, there's an element of like I'll still be like friendly and light to the people around me, but I am sort of maintaining a slight emotionality and like darkness inside. But
So what's a go-to song that kind of pulls you out of that immediately?
I don't know. I mean, I've spoken about Peanut Butter Jelly Time, but that's a song that sort of, that's my like hype song before.
Now in the game, Tommy also has, this sniper sequence is a big moment. Can fans expect some sort of version of that moment in the show?
I mean, y'all can expect all y'all want, and we'll give you what you need.
Did you do any special weapons or sniper training for the role specifically this season?
Well, actually, I did some previously with Jack Nevels, who is he trains Army snipers. He was our military consultant on Terminator Dark Fate. So I trained with him and used him as a resource, and I love him. He's a beautiful friend and a wealth of knowledge. So I try to try to extract what I could from his experience. We did go to the range quite a bit and just to get them up to snuff and yeah. So most of our armorers were really happy that I had the skill set that I kind of walked in with.
Right.
Because they put that flamethrower in my hands and we practiced for like 4 minutes. And they were like, "Yeah, Gabe's good." And I was like, "Are you sure, man? I think maybe it should be a longer session." But I mean, I'm good if you're good. If you guys feel safe, I promise you, everyone will be safe.
How familiar were either of you with the games before joining the show?
Well, I watched the first season. I was enthralled, and that was on my own accord. Mm-hmm. And then I got this mysterious message from my team saying that Craig and Neil would love to meet with me randomly and generically. And I was like, okay, well, they work on The Last of Us. I'm going to play the game. And I did. I played the second game. Yeah. And didn't know who I would be. I didn't even think it was Dina. Honestly, I thought Dina was always in the way of where I needed to go. I was like, I hope it's not Dina.
For games that I don't play, I love to watch like cinematic cutscenes. And usually on YouTube, they have like compilations of all the cinematic cutscenes stitched together. And so I did that for various games, and I happened to watch The Last of Us cinematic cutscenes stitched together years ago as a movie. And
the second one?
The first one.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is incredible. And then I watched the first season. I didn't know there was a role for me in the second game or the second season until I found out I had a meeting with Craig and Neil. And that's when I bought a PS4 and I played through the game to catch up the night before.
Wow. I didn't buy a PS4. That's awesome.
I went straight to GameStop.
That's great.
At GME all the way. But I went straight to GameStop and I got the PS4, played up until it switches to Abby's point of view, and then I tossed in a fit of rage, I tossed the game, yeah.
Now, as the guy adapting one of the most critically acclaimed video games of all time to a television show like this, roughly how many times would you guess you've now played the two games?
Oh, wow. Great question. Like in total, I mean, I know for sure, like the first game, probably 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
Second game, at least 3. It's a longer game, but then there's like chunks where instead of like just playing through, I will then go back and just watch a playthrough just because I want to put myself back in the space of that moment and how it functions. So the other thing I do is I have transcripts of the games that I will refer back to all the time.
What video game would you guess you've sunk the most time into?
Probably Nintendogs when I was about 8 years old on my very old pink Nintendo DS. I did a lot of frisbee with that dog, and I did a lot of dog walks and picking up its little digital pixel poo. It was so fun.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah.
And why is it Balatro?
Oh, for you, definitely Balatro. Yeah. I don't know how many hours do you think you have on Balatro?
Oh, I played through all of Balatro twice. Once on the Steam Deck, and then again on my iPhone. So easily 200 hours.
I think the one that consumed me the most was my Zelda game on my Switch. I was deep.
Yeah. How many hours have you just had to guess?
I mean, I'm talking like days. You know how your phone tells you, how much you've done? I'm talking days.
Mine would be Fortnite. It's my stress reliever, and I've been playing it since pre-COVID. I do like two or 3 rounds a day to like wind down. So I mean, I got to be rounding like 1,000 hours on it, like just on the PlayStation.
I used to play a lot of Counter-Strike when I was younger, but then I kind of stopped playing games, and then in preparation for a role that I did a few years back, I got into League of Legends, and I actually had to delete my Riot account because it was so hard to not play.
Probably Skyrim, or if we go back in time, the original Ninja Turtles game. But because I just never made any progress and got stuck at one level, and I probably just sank so many hours just trying to get past that game is so hard, man. It's one of the hardest games ever. I so many hours, but made so little progress.
No, literally the first game of The Last of Us. I'm not a big gamer. My dad is a big gamer, and I wouldn't list the other games that he's played. I just don't know. But his favorite game is The Last of Us. He loves The Last of Us. And I probably it was a really nice bonding experience playing the game with my dad, honestly. I spent like hours. We would just, after dinners with my family, we would just go in and play it together and stay up late. And hours of time put into playing that with him, for sure.
One thing I wanted to say, the first season I thought did such a great job, adding depth to that world, like the episode with Bill and Frank. Can fans expect any similar episodes where character perspectives are expanded this season, or are we going to see any like full Ellie or Abby episodes, or do the stories, do they stay more intertwined?
We didn't want to necessarily say, hey, let's do another Bill and Frank episode, because, that's down that path. You just end up diluting what you've done. But what we did want to do for reasons that this story wanted was to take a moment to narrow our scope down, which is enormous in this season, to really 2 people, because there is something that is important about shrinking things down to these essential bits. So yes, there is one episode in particular I'm thinking of where we funnel things down pretty dramatically. And while it is not, I don't think anybody would look at it and say, oh, this is just like that, the Bill and Frank episode. It does give us an opportunity to take our time and drill in the way we did on that one.
I've never stepped into a role in a world like this that is so big and so deeply loved prior to even, bringing it to life as an actor. I don't know, memorizing everything that I possibly could, like going over the gameplay, but not staying too attached to it, because Neil didn't want anyone to really be attached to the gameplay. And
so you did play the game, but you also tried to sort of distance yourself from it a little bit to have more creative freedom.
Yes. And that was one of Neil's requests, is that like, don't worry about playing the game and like memorizing the game characters. because we are trying to create, sort of characters here that are inspired by the game, but really digging deeper here with the show, which I think is really cool because we have the game that exists and now we have this like new, more nuanced version of the game that goes, I think that the show digs deeper than the game does, which is exciting.
You've previously mentioned that you had a concept or an outline for The Last of Us Part 3, but recently you said fans shouldn't bet on a Part 3. I'd love to know what changed and what would need to happen for a third game to move forward.
What changed? Well, we all get older.
Yeah.
We have limited time of the things that we work on. Look, here's how I've always approached things. I never take my career for granted. Every project I treat like it's my last one. Mm-hmm. And it started all the way back. And this is for when I started directing. On Last of Us 1, I didn't know if I would get another chance at that role again. So therefore, I was uncompromising. It had to be like my way or the highway. I was very unpleasant to work with probably at that time. But the story was structured in such a way that I had a definitive ending because I didn't know if I could come back for a sequel or ever visit that world again. And it became wildly successful. I got to do it again. I got to work on Uncharted 4. I approached that story the same exact way. It had to have a definitive ending. Last of Us 2, I'm like, okay, we're in a lucky position where we don't even have to make a sequel if we don't want to. That's how much Sony trusts Naughty Dog because of how successful we've been. But we had an idea that we felt passionate about. It was good enough idea to spend years on it. Hallie came on board. We worked on the story, and it felt like, okay, that story has come full circle. There's a definitive ending for this moment in time. Right now, I'm working on finishing this season. Then next, if we get renewed, if enough people watch this season, we have the next season to work on because we know this adaptation goes beyond a single season. And back at Naughty Dog, we are now working on Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet, which is something we've been working on for many years. That has taken up all of our time. I am treating these projects like it's the last thing I will ever work on. So my assumption is they will be no more. If stars align and everything comes into place, who knows what will happen.
Is it safe to say that until there's a third game that this show will be done once it's finished adapting Part 2? Or have you and Neil had further discussions about possibly expanding the series in some way?
I will be done. I may be done, it's like, this is a hard gig. My intention is to see this through to the end of the story as it currently exists, the source material that's there, if we get the opportunity to do so, and I hope we do. And then, I'm going to be very excited to then, find whatever the next thing is. But I'm committed to telling this story because I love it. Is there more Last of Us? That really primarily will sit with Neil and Naughty Dog, and that's their choice. If there are more stories to tell, I would love to be like a friend to the production, happy to do whatever the easiest thing is, but to be the writer and a director and a showrunner and all that. I think this one's going to be the one for me.
Well, so to your point, considering how long it does take to make a video game, have you and Craig had conversations about, repurposing that outline for Part 3 for television instead if the opportunity presented itself?
There's no secret outline. When we broke this season, we worked all the way to the end of the story because Craig and I, and Hallie's the same way, we must have an ending in mind, or I don't know how to make decisions otherwise, because every time we interrogate a moment, a scene, a sequence, we have a bunch of options. How do you pick which one you should go with? Is it the coolest one? No. It's got to be the one that gets you closest to the vision that works towards that eventual ending. We've already had that when we broke this season because we knew this story was bigger. That's the ending we're working towards.